So, as you know, in most um, wisdom traditions, parables are a common way that teaching is offered. So, this morning I want to take one from the ancient Buddhist canon and talk about it. And this is the story of the anger-eating demon, and I love this one. And it's a parable about a king named Saka, Sakka, in the anger eating demon, and it really offers a great way of talking about how anger arises, how it can be uprooted through wise conduct and compassion and mindfulness. And it begins with a demon. The story begins with a demon whose um, unusual nourishment, the thing that keeps him alive, is the anger of others. And because his feeding ground is this human world, he never lacks for sustenance. He never lacks for stuff to eat. Conflict, resentment, hostility are so frequent among humans that, and this is even the case, obviously, in the Buddhist time, that the anger eating demon can easily provoke quarrels and prejudice and even war when he gets hungry. And wars in particular provide him with enormous self multiplying feast. He can really gorge on them. And because once this hatred is unleashed, it grows through its own momentum. It touches even people who had previously lived peacefully. In other words, it feeds itself. Because one act of retaliation justifies the next, which justifies the next, and before long, even people who were living peacefully 2 weeks ago are fully committed to someone else's suffering, to imposing suffering on them. And that's his thing. That's what he eats, human anger. And the parable wastes no time telling us again and again that he never ever goes hungry. Because we are, and this is not a criticism, it's just an observation, reliable producers of anger. And this was no different in the Buddhist time when someone came up with this parable. Resentment, hostility, grudges, irritation, this low grade irritation that often is with us most many days. We are generous providers to the anger eating demon. He doesn't need just wars. He's fine with the smaller stuff. The snide commitment comment that we make to someone, the family dinner that goes sideways, the slow driver on, in front of us. The demon's not picky. But what the parable is pointing at underneath all this mythology is that anger strengthens itself through additional reactions, through this tit for tat. Okay. When anger arises or irritation, even mild irritation arises, and it will arise, we don't just usually feel it and let it settle. We get annoyed at being annoyed. We resent the person who provoked us. We build a case for why we're justified in being angry. And each one of these mental moves feeds the demon with more fuel. The demon in the story actually gets so overfed that at times he actually has to restrain himself. So he then backs off a little bit and nibbles on smaller things. Because the small stuff is everywhere. He can always just sort of graze on the smaller stuff. And I think about in my own life how often I'm running some version of justification in my head in the background. Nothing serious, nothing major, just little annoyances. The email that should have arrived by now, someone who, slammed the door in my face and didn't hold it, and I, and sometimes about the weather, just whatever little annoyance pops up on my radar, and and the weather, as you know, doesn't consider my feelings. It doesn't consider my feedback. So one day, according to the story, the demon decides to test himself in the heavenly realm. He goes to the domain of Saka, the king of gods in this realm. And now the parable makes an interesting acknowledgement here. It says that the gods are far above the petty quarrels that plague humans. Okay, in the story, they don't get into this stuff that human beings are doing down on earth. But but a few of them, only a few of them, I should say, have completely eliminated ill will. And that's where the parable, sort of hones in on it, because even what it's saying there, that even at an elevated level of practice, an elevated level of development, the seeds of aversion can still be there. They're not screaming, it may just be a low hum, but a subtle preference for things to be other than they are. We get irritated when that's the case. Now, this isn't a reason for us to get discouraged and feel like we're failing. It's a reason to motivate us into continued practice. The eradication of anger, or the better management of anger, I should say, in Buddhism is not something we accomplish, in a weekend. We just don't. Sokka is the king of gods, is temporarily away the day the demon visits the heavenly realm. So the demon walks in, he sits on Sokka's throne, and he waits. And he's grinning grotesquely, just sitting there, just waiting for Sokka to show up. Because that's how it often goes. Anger doesn't usually announce itself with a big explosion with a brass band. It arrives when our awareness is absent, when we're not paying attention to what's coming up. And it settles into the seat of authority, which is the ego. And into this, it does its mischief before we've even registered what's going on. And then it waits. It waits for the right trigger. It waits for someone to stay with the parable to walk in and see it sitting on the throne. So the other gods come back, they find him there, and they are outraged, morally outraged, furious. They shout insults. They demand punishment. They want the anger-eating demon thrown into hell. But guess what? With each shout, he grows. He feeds. He gets larger. He gets stronger because their anger at him is just sustenance for him. And he in the story, he emits this sort of reddish, smoky glow that dims the light of the gods around him, the lesser gods, and pushes them backwards. Now, here again, the parable is describing something we've all seen, even if we haven't named it. That aggression strengthens the thing we're trying to remove. Strengthens the thing when we meet hostility with hostility, it simply feeds it. It simply escalates it. So the gods were right in a sense because the demon had no business sitting on the throne. Their outrage was understandable, but righteous anger is still anger. And righteous anger is still nourishment for the anger-eating demon. And this is I think, one of the more uncomfortable aspects of the story. But I want to stay with it for a moment because I think it really has relevance. The story's lessons is immensely practical. In daily life, we often imagine that responding forcefully to a provocation will solve the problem. But the parable tells us that it will do just the opposite. It will worsen the problem. Meeting hostility with hostility does not rid us of it, does not purify it, it simply feeds us. So, back to the parable. So Sokka returns, greets the demon with equanimity and non-reactivity. He's very wise. This is illustrating the Buddhist teachings of non-ill will and loving kindness. These are not passive qualities where he just gives in. They require strength, alertness, and inner stability. Sokka's calm greeting is not some naive politeness. It is strategic compassion, the deliberate choice to prevent anger from taking root, the deliberate choice not to feed the demon. And this parable here, at this stage of the parable, points to an important psychological truth. Anger is dependent on conditions. If we remove the conditions which support it, it fades away, it lessens. We don't have to wrestle with it. We don't have to counterattack. We don't have to suppress it. We simply need to stop feeding it. And Sokka's act with the demon illustrates this beautifully. He doesn't debate with the demon. He doesn't attack the demon. He doesn't explain to the demon why he shouldn't be sitting on his throne. He undermines his power at its source by refusing to react with anger or aversion. And the teaching, I think, in the parable has broad applications. When someone speaks harshly to us, our immediate habit is to either defend ourselves angrily or strike back verbally. And of course, as we all know, this is all doings of the ego. But the anger-eating demon suggests that doing that only enlarges and escalates the problem. What if instead we respond with a calm mind or with curiosity or a simple pause? Just put a pause in before we respond. That emotional fire will start to die down and cool. And similarly, within our own minds, when resentment arises, we can acknowledge it. Oh, resentment is arising without emotionally fanning its flames. A moment of mindful breathing, compassionate self-talk, reconsidering our assumptions about what's going on deprives the anger of the mental energy it needs to grow, as illustrated in the parable. Now, the parable also shows the danger of the sort of moral, what we often call moral or righteous indignation. The gods in the parable, when the demon gets on the throne, believe they were right to be offended, that their anger was righteous. And in this story, the righteousness is just more fuel for the demon. This is a powerful insight from the Buddha, because even when we feel justified in our anger, it still causes harm to ourselves, to others. It obscures our wisdom, it distorts our perception, and it takes away our serenity. It takes away our peace. Because true strength does not lie in fury. It lies in the ability to remain steady, to keep our equanimity, and to remain even kind amidst provocation. Sokka's behavior in this parable illustrates the importance of being grounded in wisdom. Instead of joining his followers in their anger, he models a wiser way. His calmness toward the demon not only solves the immediate problem, but teaches the other gods how to handle conflict skillfully. He's showing them through his actions. Leadership through compassion in these situations has the power to disarm even the most entrenched hostility, because we're not feeding it. Anger grows when it's fed, and it diminishes when it's starved. And the world right now is so full of it that this lesson is as important as it's ever been. Because remember, hostility harms those of us who harbor it. Calm friendliness, taking the pause, is not a weakness. It's a profound strategy, effective strategy for breaking this tit-for-tat cycle of aggression. The Buddha would teach that the ability to remain grounded, to remain unshaken in the face of provocation, is one of the highest forms of spiritual maturity. So if we embody Sokka's example with the demon on the throne, respond with goodwill rather than resentment, we can dissolve conflict. We can protect our own clarity of mind and contribute to a more harmonious world. So there's some thoughts about managing anger from the perspective of this ancient parable. So thank you.